Beijing to announce a unique and promising partnership between the government of China and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I want to thank the Chinese Ministry of Health for bringing us together to accelerate the global fight against TB. I want to thank all the ministers of health and the representatives of more than 24 countries who are here to write national plans to fight TB. I want to acknowledge Margaret Chan and the WHO for their partnership and tireless work against this disease. I also want to express my thanks to Vice Premier Li Keqiang for his leading role in China's rising commitment to public health. I've been fortunate enough to travel to China many times, and each time I come away impressed with the talent, energy, and creativity of the Chinese people. Today, the government of China committed these strengths to the cause of reducing TB, which is phenomenal news. If China leads the fight against TB, developing new approaches here in China and demonstrating them to the world, we will see a dramatic drop in the number of TB deaths in the next decade. We can accomplish something very important if all the world's emerging economies, Brazil, India, South Africa, India, and China, all work together to increase their commitment to public health. This would give us a much higher percentage of the world's people applying their intelligence to these problems and inventing and exporting solutions. That could disrupt the old patterns of inequity and help remake the map of global health. You all know that more than 9 million people develop tuberculosis every year, and nearly 2 million people die from it. And 500,000 patients a year are developing TB that is resistant to drugs that have been effective for 50 years. Some strains have shown resistance to all drugs. Unless we do a better job of treating TB, multi-drug resistant TB will make up an ever-rising share of TB cases until the ratio eventually flips. Instead of having mostly drug-susceptible TB, we'll have mostly drug-resistant TB. Sickness and death would multiply, and because treating MDR-TB costs sometimes as much as 100 times more than treating regular TB, the economics would be catastrophic. So this prospect is alarming, and it should galvanize us to action. And I believe we will prevent this because of the convergence of two forces, urgency and innovation. In the history of the fight against tuberculosis, we've had periods of urgency and we've had periods of innovation, but we have not had urgency and innovation working together. In the 19th century, the urgency of the disease drove people to begin treating TB in sanatoriums. But at the time, there was very little innovation. In the mid-20th century, we had innovation with the discovery of antibiotics. But overconfidence prevented there from being urgency, and research stalled, leading to a period of neglect, literally with neither innovation or urgency. In the early 1990s, the WHO declared TB a global emergency. Urgency returned, and we saw the scale-up of DOTS around the world, including here in China, which did an impressive job of spreading it nationally. The DOTS approach was an innovation, and it saved many lives. But there was still no innovation in the tools. The most commonly used diagnostic test is today more than 125 years old. The vaccine was developed more than 80 years ago, and the drugs have not changed in 50 years. There's an expression in English that we use when you're caught in a fight, but you can't use all your advantages. We say it's fighting with one arm tied behind your back. For centuries, the world has been fighting this infectious disease with one arm tied behind its back. That's why we haven't been winning. I believe we can have a future very different from the past because we're finally entering an era where we bring together both innovation and urgency. The rise of MDR-TB has restored a sense of urgency, and innovations are finally coming online with the promise of better diagnostics, new drugs, better systems, and eventually a new vaccine. So finally, we are starting to put our talent and energy into this fight. Today, the most commonly used diagnostic test for TB detects only half of all cases. But coming along, we now have an LED microscope that can detect 65% of cases and allows diagnoses to be made 3 times as fast as before. Today, the most commonly used diagnostic test for MDR-TB takes 6 weeks. But now we have a much better test, one that will give results in the same day. If we use slow diagnostics, patients go on infecting family members for weeks. If we get same-day diagnosis, you can begin treatment immediately and reduce new infections. Quicker, more accurate diagnoses can make a big impact against the combination of HIV and TB. People who have HIV are more likely to get active TB, and TB is the leading cause of death for people with AIDS. If we can diagnose and treat TB in people with AIDS, we get them many more years of life to support their families, raise their children, and take care of their parents. Today, the most commonly used medicines come in the form of loose pills, and patients have to take as many as 13 pills a day. But we have fixed-dose combinations which can bring the pill burden down from 13 to just 4 or even 3 or 2. That would make it far easier for patients to complete their full course of treatment, curing the disease and reducing transmission. In coming years, we should be able to replace the current tests and treatment with these new approaches. Within the next few years, we're likely to see a nucleic acid-based diagnostic with 98% accuracy and that tests for drug resistance at the same time. This would attack a top cause of tuberculosis, the patients whose TB is missed by the test and who don't get treated, and who keep spreading the disease, including MDR-TB. Within this decade, we also hope to introduce new antibiotics that the bacterium has never seen before and for which there is no resistance. These drugs can become part of standard first-line treatment for everyone with TB, whether they have MDR-TB or not. And that would simplify the treatment of even the drug resistance cases. No matter what drugs we use, though, of course, the bacterium will develop resistance, which is why it's important that we keep the drug pipeline full at the same time as working on a vaccine. Over the next 4 years, we'll have results from vaccine trials that could show us a far more effective vaccine, which would be a critical advance in the fight against TB. So there's a great future of innovation ahead of us. But if we don't keep spending on research, that future won't come. It can be hard to make these investments, particularly in a time of economic difficulty. We need to weigh the investment against the return. My commitment to this research comes from my experience in software, and I'm convinced that the lesson there applies here as well. The best money invested, whether by a corporation, a government, or a foundation, is finding inexpensive ways to prevent costly problems. The return can be astronomical. Our foundation's fight against infectious disease came out of a question my Melinda and I began to explore 10 years ago. We asked ourselves where a dollar of funding can have the biggest impact in saving and improving people's lives. We believe that tuberculosis, given the scale of the problem, the rising urgency, and the opportunities for innovations, is one of the best investments in the world today if you want to improve people's lives. Of course, one foundation's effort is never enough. You have to find many partners who feel the same way.